Good morning. It's another wonderful Monday here in, well, it's actually sunny. So in sunny Gothenburg, the time is 5:35, 5:55, and as you may see, I am in my usual let's go to the gym outfit. So I was going to talk to you a little bit about I know I've been talking a little bit about, well, not more than a little bit, but like React and the ideas that framework is providing to the JavaScript community. And I thought, especially things such as Flux and like these architectures and the functional programming aspects of things. And hopefully if you've been, listening in and so you're thinking, hey, maybe this Frederick guy has some ideas that, I should try it out. Hopefully you have, and you've gotten the basics of how these architectures work. If you haven't tried out Flux or you want to know more about that, I made a previous video where I tried to explain the basic concepts. I think that's a good starting point to kind of, and there are lots of tutorials on the topic. So I wanted to give you a suggestion as well, because one thing I've seen quite a bit in programming is you probably know, or you should at least check it out, that there is a pattern called MVC, Model View Controller. And this is hands down the most common pattern for application structures. And the idea is that you have a model which is responsible, or a layer, like a series of code, a part of the code which is responsible for accessing databases, like going to databases and providing data to your business logic. And then you have the view, which is usually in web world, like things such as HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all that stuff. And that's also separate. You don't mix those two. And then you have the controller, which is the connection point for all of this. So in essence, the controller is an object with a bunch of functions which are called when a user goes to a specific URL. So when your browser hits google.com, that is going to, on the server, map to an object that has a function that will run some code, where usually it's just a function which like goes and gets some data from the database, gets like the HTML and the CSS and all that stuff, gets that file, puts the data in, it renders your data into that document and sends it to your browser. That's the mindset, right? The problem, or that's not even a problem. One thing I've noticed though is that especially like there's a large amount of people who seem to think that the MVC pattern is not just at the conceptual level, at the code level, they also apply it at the directory level, like the project level. I see it all the time. You have actually, a lot of people like will have a directory called model and a view and controllers, like all the time. They separate that. Now, I will go out and say that I don't think that's the best way, especially when you are adopting this idea of, like say in front-end world, you're adopting this idea of components, bricks, Lego pieces, like small modules. At least not for when you're making interfaces. I will argue that the idea of, which is from object-oriented programming, which is called encapsulation, which is the idea that, well, if you have a user object or something, then everything you need to do with a user should be inside of that object. You don't have to, the caller or the instantiator of your object should not have to know what's going on the inside. It should be magic to them, because when they're using that object or consuming that object, like the idea is that they're using it to do something and they don't really care so much about how that works. They just want it to happen. Kind of like how you and me and probably a lot of people feel about it every day. Like, I mean, I don't know exactly how a microwave works. I just want it to work. Anyway, I argue that this is not the best way to structure at least a React application, and in fact most JavaScript-based applications. I say that you should think about encapsulation at the directory level. So what I usually do is that I have my like index file, or the file that actually contains my component code, which is the thing that's going to be put on the page. I put that in a directory, and I call that directory, say, list. Let's call it that. And then inside of that directory, I put a directory called __test __. And inside of there, I put my unit test. It's still in the same directory. And then I have my CSS files, or SAS files, or less, whatever I use. Put that in that directory too. And I name it after the name of the component. And if I need any type of functions or utilities, like I separate that. I usually don't, like I see a lot of people do this, especially in React. They create an object and then they put all of their logic and code and stuff like that in the component, so that it's not just a view component, it also has a bunch of logic. Once again, don't do that. My suggestion to you is put that in a separate file, make sure that all your logic is in pure functions, because it becomes very testable and very efficient overall. And so the idea is that regardless of how many files you have, you put them in this directory, and you achieve encapsulation for this component at the directory level. So not saying that don't put everything inside the same object within the code, just put it in the same directory and then import that. So what happens is that that directory represents a single point where everything that you need to use that component, that piece of logic, exists in the same place. Now this is very powerful, because when you have all these separate directories, where you have one for tests and one for components and one for view, like the overhead is much larger. Like you have 3 or 4 places you need to know about, especially when you're new to the code base. You have to remember all these places, and let's say that you wanted to remove this component, it's no longer used. Now you can delete a single directory and check that, especially in a loosely typed language, and now like you remove that directory that's no longer in the code base. And if you have some common functionality, you move the entire directory to a common folder. Like, just try this out. It's been working very well for me. One of my favorite parts about it is that, let's say I'm bundling things with Webpack and I want to know, like, I want to figure out, is this breaking anything? Well, I just rename the directory and I can immediately figure out all the places where this modular library is being used from. The cool part about this is that this is not an old pattern. It was used in C for quite a while, so just try it out.